Welcome, my name is Chris Morley of Retail Global. Today we're seeing more and more brands look to expand overseas and take advantage of emerging markets. Now these emerging markets present a lot of opportunities for these brands and retailers as they go into new countries. But these amazing opportunities also present a lot of barriers to entry. And it's really important that you have partners to help overcome these barriers to entry. Today I'm joined by Andrew Rufener, CEO Omniscien, one of these such partners. Welcome Andrew, how are you?
I'm fine, thank you very much.
That's good. Thanks for joining us, Andrew. We are seeing a huge increase in cross-border e-commerce across the globe and a lot of brands and retailers expanding using cross-border. Why do you think that is?
I think there's a number of factors, but we probably need to sort of look at it, as I say, in terms of some of the key markets where we're actually seeing these trends. So if you're looking at North and South America, I think that's largely due to the fact that there's at large, similar culture and languages, which makes it a lot easier to grow very fast, specifically if you're looking at some of the marketplaces. If you turn to the European Union, where we definitely see growth as well, that's obviously supported also by the fact that there's a common market, there's a common currency, there's common regulation, which makes a lot of this a lot easier than it used to be a couple of years back. And then if we're looking at Asia, Asia is still a little bit more fragmented, picking up very fast. And there's definitely a number of larger cross-border marketplaces emerging, but they still maintain a local presence. So if you're looking at people like Alibaba or Lazada, for example, here in Asia, you would still see them maintaining local websites in local countries so that users can, even though they use the platform, they use the marketplace, they can benefit from accessing it in local language. And the same is true, by the way, in Europe. Somebody in Germany using Amazon would head over to Amazon.de and will not go off to the French website. So I think depending on the geo, it depends on a variety of factors. So we've got common markets, that definitely is a factor that helps, common currency, common culture, common language, and then obviously the accessibility in local language. From an infrastructure perspective, of course, what also drives and underpins a lot of this growth is the fact that we've got a number of very large marketplaces globally. I mean, whether we're looking at Amazon, Alibaba, Lazada, eBay, etc. They provide a pretty solid infrastructure for sellers and buyers to access. In addition to that, of course, we've got other infrastructure around it. So shipping worldwide has become a lot easier, which makes it easier for a seller to ship goods from A to B. Payment providers are providing a global payment infrastructure, which makes it relatively simple and risk-free for us to transfer funds. And that altogether, I think also with just the ease of shopping online, of course, are factors that contribute to this growth that we're seeing.
Yeah. So you mentioned marketplaces in there. Do you see these marketplaces as being a good place to start when looking to expand internationally? Why is that?
I wouldn't say that is the ideal place to start. I think the ideal place to start will depend very much on what you're actually trying to achieve. So if you're as a corporate, you're trying to start to sell online, then a marketplace might not necessarily be the right place because you can't really drive your own brand. But generally speaking, they're definitely a good place to start. And the reason for that is that there's a lot of infrastructure, as we just mentioned before, that is provided for you. So you don't need to take care of the actual platform. You've got immediately accessible to a very large group of buyers. And many of the platforms take care of many of the factors that we just talked about, whether it is payment infrastructure. Many of them also take care of localization. So people like Amazon, for example, or Lazada here in Asia, they actually localize content on behalf of the seller.
Yep.
It means that it's becoming a lot more easy for you to very quickly get up and running and sell your goods to a very large audience. But again, I mean, what's ultimately the right place to start will depend very much on what you're trying to achieve.
Yeah, I think that's a great point about looking at the different marketplaces and localization. So you did mention localization, and just how important is that when you're going into the markets, and what are some things you'd look out for or encourage your partners to look out for, your retailers to watch for?
I mean, I think localization is obviously important. Even if you speak multiple languages, you tend to respond a lot more to anything that's in your local language. So the ability to localizing content is definitely important, whether we're talking about online commerce or something else. And then, of course, if we're looking at regional audiences as well, there's also cultural differences, potential sensitivities that we need to deal with. So I think localization is there, definitely very important. It also depends, how we localize depends very much again on what we're trying to achieve. So if you think, for example, you're trying to localize content on a luxury goods website, that's always something that you will spend quite a lot of time and money on to get that done perfectly with humans, get the wording right. So you relay the emotion and what we're really trying to get across. Whereas if we're looking at some of the marketplaces, and these are customers that we've been working with a lot as well, then you've all of a sudden got a very different challenge. You've got usually a number of languages, hundreds of thousands of SKUs that need to be localized in a relatively short period of time. Cost is an issue. So that's the point in time where it really doesn't become feasible anymore to do pure human localization. The other thing that's important to understand, and anybody who's in e-commerce will obviously know that, is that many of the buying decisions on marketplaces are actually taken based on titles. Yeah. So it's differences depending on the platform, but 70 to 80% is not an unreasonable number to select. So that basically means you also need to think quite carefully about the type of content that you've got on the platform and what's ultimately going to affect your bottom line. So in cases of marketplaces and localizing for marketplaces, just getting the title of your product right in terms of the keywords, but also the localization can really help make or break a quarter.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think if you look at even using English as a language, Australian and Americans and English, we from UK, we all sort of speak the same language, but there's different words that can mean different things. Buying thongs in Australia is different from buying thongs in the US, for instance. So that comes back to your comment about title. I mean, just how important is it to get the title right? And then what role does that play going forward? And what things would you encourage retailers to look out for with titles?
Well, I mean, first of all, for those who are maybe not quite so familiar with the challenge, what I'd suggest is you head over to one of those marketplaces and look at just a dozen of these titles. Yep. And what you will find is that they're really not sentences. It's just a bunch of keywords and a couple of words in between in order to get obviously high in the ranking from a search perspective and relay the essence of the message. And again, keep in mind that a lot of people take their buying decision based on the title. Yeah. So from a pure business perspective, that means the title is absolutely essential. If you don't get the title right in terms of the keywords, but you also don't get it right in terms of the localization, that's just going to affect your sales, and it's obviously then going to affect your bottom line. So understanding the structure of your content and what you're actually trying to localize is definitely something that's very important to understand. The second thing that I think is important to understand is that a localization is not just translation. So a lot of people use those terms interchangeably, but that's not really the case. And I think you just mentioned that earlier as well. So if you're looking at countries that use imperial measurements versus metric, if you're localizing, you actually need to convert that. Simple things that we forget, like shoe sizes, for example, are different market to market. So if you're localizing that content, you need to get that right. If you don't, people will either not buy, or they will buy the wrong product and they will send it straight back to you. So that's going to increase your cost. So these are some of the key things that sound very basic that you definitely need to understand. Yeah. And then obviously if we're looking at localizing using machines so we can reduce cost and shorten time to market, then the immediate next question becomes, well, how do we do that? Again, if you look at one of those titles yourself, just imagine that you actually need to localize some of those. Some of them are really difficult to localize. So if we then just send these kind of titles over to our favorite cloud provider that we use for our standard translation, probably the result is not that you're going to get back is not that good. And that's not to say that they're not doing a good job with the platforms that they provide. They just have not been designed to localize online or e-commerce content, which is very complicated to do. So if you're trying to get this done and you're trying to get this done right, and if you're really considering it from a business perspective, I think the thing really is to understand what you're trying to achieve, what the impact is, and then ultimately finding the right tool for the job. Which means in this particular case is to find a platform that is designed to localize online retail content and is not designed as a more generic platform just to provide just translations.
Yeah. No, some really good advice, Andrew, in the past few responses. And just finally, before we wrap up, I mean, as we look and see more of these retailers and brands expand overseas, what other pieces of advice would you give them as they join these new regions and new markets?
That's obviously a very difficult question for me to provide people with advice as to what they should or should not do. But I'd like to sort of tie it back to the things that we've just talked about. I mean, at the end of the day, just make sure that you understand what you're trying to achieve, where you're trying to sell, what the local requirements are, and in terms of culture, in terms of product, in terms of potential sensitivities. Make sure what is going to affect your sales and your bottom line, and then make sure that you take your localization decisions and your content decisions based on that understanding, and don't just head into a adventure, cross-border adventure, without that level of preparation.
Yeah. Andrew, you've given some amazing advice for the listeners today, and I really think they'll be going back and watching this a few times. The benefits and amazing opportunities are definitely there when you look at overseas, and I encourage you to look at partners like Omniscien, who have worked with Retail Global in the past. We hope we'll continue to work with you in the future. Andrew Rufener, thanks once again for your time today. Look forward to catching up soon.
Thanks for having me. Take care.